On a cold winter night in Rome, deep within the thick stone walls of the Vatican, a wedding took place. This wasn't just any wedding. It was a ceremony the Church would spend centuries trying to hide. An event so shrouded in mystery that it has been almost completely erased from the official record. On the surface, it was presented as a normal union, a strategic alliance between two powerful families, something common in those times. But beneath the veneer of celebration and diplomacy lay a truth far darker, far more disturbing. What really happened that night? To find the answer, we have to dig deep, past the polished narratives and into the forgotten corners of history. We'll look at fragmented old records, decipher cryptic personal letters, and piece together the whispered stories that have trickled down through generations. All these scattered clues point to something unbelievable, something so strange that no official historian of the Church dares to mention it openly. It's a story of power, politics, and a chilling ritual that defies everything we think we know about this sacred institution. Eyewitness accounts, though rare and often coded, paint a haunting picture. People who were present described an atmosphere heavy and thick, like smoke filling a closed room. They said the grand halls of the Vatican, usually echoing with hymns and prayers, felt different that night. It was as if the ancient walls themselves were holding their breath, watching the grim proceedings. The air was charged with a palpable tension, a sense of foreboding that settled over everyone in attendance, from the highest-ranking cardinals to the lowest-ranking guards. And then there was the bride. She wasn't glowing with happiness, as you would expect. Witnesses wrote that she moved as if in a trance, her steps heavy and measured. She didn't walk like a person moving toward a future of love and partnership. Instead, she resembled a sacrifice, a pawn in a much larger game, walking toward a destiny she never chose and could not escape. Her eyes, they said, were hollow, reflecting the cold candlelight, but showing no life within. Who was she, and who was the groom? The other half of this sinister equation. Their identities are central to this puzzle, and we will uncover them. But the most shocking part of this entire event, the part that has been most fiercely denied and suppressed, is the ritual. It's known in hushed tones as 3 times in one night. This wasn't a private, intimate moment between a newly married couple. It was a public performance, a horrifying ceremony forced upon the bride in front of a room full of people. Imagine the scene. Priests, nobles, foreign ambassadors, and stern-faced guards, all watching. It was a terrifying spectacle that blended power, religion, politics, and cruelty into a single, unforgettable moment of public humiliation. This story isn't a romance. It has nothing to do with love or faith. It is a raw and brutal story of control, fear, and the power of silence. It reveals the darkest face of an institution that has long been defined by its secrets. The Vatican, with all its might and influence, tried to bury this night, to pretend it never happened. They shredded documents, silenced witnesses, and rewrote history to protect their image. But history has a way of remembering, even if only in whispers. In this video, we will step inside the Vatican's most hidden night. We're going to pull back the curtain and explore the intense power battles that orchestrated this wedding. We will investigate the true identities of the bride and groom and the political machinations that brought them to that altar. And most importantly, we will dissect the meaning of the horrifying ritual that took place in front of everyone, exposing why it was performed and what it was meant to achieve. We'll analyze the political climate of the time, understanding the web of alliances and rivalries that turned a sacred union into a political tool. We'll examine the key players involved, from the Pope who sanctioned the event to the families who benefited from it. We'll look at what this wedding meant for the balance of power in Europe and how it solidified the Church's dominance in a time of great upheaval. This is more than just a historical account. It's a detective story. We'll be piecing together clues from art, architecture, and suppressed texts to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. We'll explore the psychological impact on the young bride, forced into a nightmarish situation for the sake of her family's ambition. What became of her? Did she survive the ordeal? Or was she another casualty of a ruthless political game? The Vatican tried to erase this night from memory, to wash away the stain of what occurred. But whispers have a way of surviving, passed down from one generation to the next. Today, we are not just listening to those whispers. We are giving them a voice. We are bringing them into the light. Prepare yourself, because the story you are about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about one of the world's most powerful and secretive organizations. So, join us as we journey back in time, into the heart of the Vatican, to a night of secrets, shadows, and a wedding that was never meant to be remembered. This is the story they didn't want you to know. Thanks for watching. And if you find these hidden histories as fascinating as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. To truly grasp why this strange ritual happened, we have to look behind the golden curtains of the Vatican and into the political storm brewing within. Now, when we think of the Church, we often picture a sacred place, a sanctuary far from earthly desires like ambition or corruption. But back then, the Vatican was less of a spiritual center and more like a cutthroat royal court. It was a labyrinth of competing factions, powerful noble families, and ambitious men who viewed religion not as a deeply held faith, but as the ultimate tool for power. Imagine a silent, invisible war being fought in the hallways of St. Peter's. Different groups were constantly plotting, each with their own agenda. Some factions were determined to control the Italian peninsula, using the Church's authority to expand their territory. Others had grander ambitions. They wanted to steer the entire continent of Europe, shaping its destiny from Rome. There were even those who aimed to use faith itself as a leash, hoping to guide and control kings and emperors across the known world. Every single decision made within those hallowed walls, from a simple decree to a major appointment, could ripple outwards and affect entire nations. These decisions could start wars, end them, or spark cultural movements that would last for centuries. In this high-stakes environment, every marriage between noble families was a calculated move on a massive chessboard. These unions were never about love. They were about forging alliances and consolidating power. Let's look at the couple at the center of our story. The groom came from one of the most prominent families of the time, a family that had been a pillar of financial support for the Church for generations. They were the ones who provided soldiers for papal armies, who filled the Church's coffers with gold, and who offered crucial political protection in a dangerous world. But their loyalty wasn't free. In return for their support, they expected influence as say in the Church's decisions. For years, they had been pressuring the Vatican, pushing for policies and appointments that would strengthen their own position and secure their family's future. On the other side of this strategic equation was the bride. Her family wielded a different, more subtle, yet equally potent form of power. The power of bloodline. Her lineage was ancient, deeply respected, and connected to traditions so old that even the mighty Church hesitated to challenge them. Her family represented legitimacy, a purity of heritage, and the kind of authority that came from ancestry, not just wealth or military might. Marrying her to the groom was a masterstroke of political engineering. It was a plan to fuse two immense forces, the raw, tangible power of military and financial influence with the symbolic, almost mystical power of an ancient noble bloodline. This marriage would create a new powerhouse, a superfaction that could potentially dominate the political landscape. But the Vatican had its own game to play. A simple alliance between these two families wasn't enough for them. They wanted more than just a seat at the table. They wanted to own the table. Their ultimate goal was absolute control. The Pope and his inner circle saw this wedding as a golden opportunity to send a clear, undeniable message to everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest king. They wanted to demonstrate, in a very public and dramatic way, that spiritual authority, the power of the Church, was superior to any earthly power, including noble blood. They aimed to prove that even the most powerful, most ancient, and most respected families could be bent, broken, and ultimately reshaped by the will of the Church. This wedding was not just a ceremony. It was chosen to be the stage for a spectacular display of dominance, and the bizarre, unsettling ritual known as 3 times in one night was designed to be the instrument of that demonstration. It was the key to asserting the Church's ultimate authority, turning a celebration of union into a lesson in submission. What exactly was this ritual, and how did it work? That's where our story gets truly dark. Follow me as we uncover the secrets of this forgotten ceremony. You won't want to miss what happens next. She was just 18, a name spoken in hushed, respectful tones among the great noble houses. Her beauty was legendary, but it was her bloodline that truly set her apart. Her family's history was a tapestry woven with threads of ancient, pre-Christian rituals, tales of safeguarding sacred texts, and a lineage they claimed had remained pure for countless generations. From the moment she could understand words, she knew her future was not her own to decide. Her marriage would be a pact, a treaty, a duty. She was sculpted for a role she had never auditioned for. Yet, in all her carefully managed imaginings, she never once pictured the Vatican as the suitor who would claim her life. Within the hallowed, yet politically charged walls of the church, many saw her bloodline as a potent symbol. The prevailing belief, or at least the one spoken aloud, was that uniting her with a staunch supporter of the Vatican would cleanse the political landscape, purifying old tensions and birthing a new era of unwavering loyalty. It was a strategic, almost spiritual, maneuver. But beneath the surface of this official narrative, darker whispers slithered through the corridors. Rumors of a more sinister motive, a faction within the church that desired not to ally with her family's traditions, but to erase them completely. They wanted to absorb her power and then extinguish its source. Her arrival at the Vatican, days before the ceremony, was a descent into a gilded prison. The very air felt heavy, suffocating. The magnificent halls, meant to inspire awe, felt like the bars of a cage closing around her. A chilling silence would fall over a room the moment she entered. Priests, their faces impassive masks, would follow her with an unnerving intensity. Even the women assigned to be her handmaidens, her companions, seemed terrified. They moved around her like ghosts, their eyes darting away from hers, their lips sealed shut as if they feared their own words. She was encased in layers of heavy, opulent fabrics, the gold embroidery weighing her down, a veil so intricate and dense it felt less like a bridal accessory and more like a fisherman's net, trapping her. Every step, every gesture, was choreographed and controlled by someone else. Her own voice, once clear and confident, became a whisper lost beneath the crushing weight of expectation and tradition. The true horror began to dawn on her in a small, locked room. A stern-faced woman, one of her chaperones, spoke to her in a low, urgent tone. The words were a command, delivered without warmth or explanation. On your wedding night, you must obey every command, without question. A cold dread washed over the young bride. She found her voice, asking the one question that burned in her mind. Why? The woman refused to meet her gaze, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall as she whispered a single, cryptic sentence that would haunt the bride's every waking moment. The ritual must be seen by all. You must accept it. The bride's mind reeled. What ritual? Seen by whom? The words were meaningless. A puzzle with no solution. She pleaded for more information, for any hint of what was to come. But the woman just shook her head, her face a mask of grim finality. The bride was left alone with those terrifying words, a prophecy of an ordeal she couldn't possibly comprehend. She wouldn't understand. Not until the doors were locked, the candles were lit, and it was far, far too late. The wedding day was a blur of ceremony and spectacle. She moved as if in a dream, a beautifully adorned puppet whose strings were pulled by unseen hands. The groom was a man she barely knew, a powerful duke whose loyalty to the Vatican was absolute. He looked at her not with affection, but with a kind of triumphant ownership. She was his prize, a symbol of his elevated status within the church's intricate power structure. The ceremony itself was a grand performance, filled with incense, Latin chants, and the watchful eyes of cardinals and bishops. Each one of them seemed to be a spectator at a play, waiting for the final, crucial act. As night fell, she was led not to a private bridal chamber, but to a large, ornate hall. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't right. The room was lined with pews, and they were filled. Cardinals, nobles, influential members of the court, they were all there, their faces illuminated by candlelight, their expressions a mixture of pious anticipation and morbid curiosity. They were an audience. They were an audience. Her handmaidens stripped her of the heavy wedding gown, replacing it with a simple, thin white shift. The groom was brought in, and he too was dressed in ceremonial robes. A high-ranking cardinal stepped forward, a heavy, ancient-looking book in his hands. He began to chant in a language she didn't recognize, a guttural, archaic tongue that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The words from the locked room echoed in her mind. The ritual must be seen by all. This was the ritual. It wasn't a private union between a husband and a wife. It was a public spectacle, a consummation performed as a holy rite before the eyes of the powerful. The purpose became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about purifying political tensions. It was about humiliation, domination, and the complete and utter subjugation of her ancient bloodline. By forcing this act upon her in public, they were symbolically breaking her family's spirit, demonstrating the Church's ultimate power over the old ways. They were showing everyone that no tradition, no matter how ancient or sacred, was beyond their reach, beyond their control. A wave of nausea and terror washed over her. She looked around at the faces in the crowd, searching for a single shred of compassion, of humanity. She found none. They were all part of it, willing participants in her degradation. Her groom approached, his face devoid of emotion, ready to play his part in the grim spectacle. This was his duty, just as it was hers. But his was a duty of power. Hers was one of submission. She realized then the true meaning of the whispers about erasing her family's traditions. It wasn't about simply ignoring them. It was about defiling them in the most public and permanent way imaginable. They weren't just taking her future. They were taking her family's past, twisting it into a grotesque display of their own authority. As the cardinal's chanting reached a fever pitch, she closed her eyes. Her body was a prisoner in that hall, but in her mind, she retreated to the stories of her ancestors, to the legends of their strength and their magic. It was the only sanctuary she had left. She was the unwilling sacrifice on the altar of Vatican ambition. Her innocence, the price for a new cycle of loyalty, cemented not by faith, but by fear. The ritual had begun, and a part of her, the girl who had once dreamed, died right there in that candlelit hall before the unblinking eyes of the Church. Thank you for watching. If this story captivated you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you do UNT. Miss our next dive into the forgotten and forbidden corners of history. We'll see you next time. The Groom was a man in his mid-30s, and while he was respected for his sharp mind, he was feared for his ambition. He wasn't a man of deep faith, not really, but you wouldn't know it from the way he walked the halls of the Vatican. He moved with an air of ownership, as if the ancient stones themselves bowed to his will. His family's history was steeped in military might, a legacy of power they had provided to the Church for generations. And now, he saw this marriage as the final, crucial step in his ascent to political greatness. This wasn't about love. He wasn't marrying for affection or companionship. He was marrying for pure, unadulterated domination. He was convinced that the ritual scheduled for that night would be the ultimate proof of his strength. It would cement his place within the Vatican's exclusive inner circle, a position he craved more than anything. For months he had been locked in tense negotiations, hammering out the terms of this union. He wasn't just asking for a wife. He was demanding a subject. His demands were clear. Complete and total authority over the bride. He wanted her will to be his own. He wanted public recognition of his absolute dominance, a spectacle for all of Rome and the Church to witness. He wanted them to see his power and know that a new force had arrived. The men he kept as his closest allies were anything but harmless. They were wolves in fine robes, each one more dangerous than the last. There was a cardinal, infamous for his merciless punishments and his cold, unforgiving nature. Then there was a bishop, a man who held the secrets of half the noble families in Italy like a collection of rare, poisonous jewels. And finally, his chief political strategist, a master manipulator who understood the dark art of turning fear into unwavering loyalty. It was these men, huddled in shadowy corners, who whispered the idea of a ritual into his ear. They didn't suggest something simple or symbolic. They proposed something ancient, something that would send shockwaves through the city. They wanted an act so unforgettable that it would force every single witness to not only respect the groom but to fear him deeply. The goal was twofold: to elevate him and to utterly humiliate the bride's family, breaking their influence forever. It was a calculated move to shatter their power base in a single, brutal display. It was these same allies who insisted on the repetition. The ritual, they argued, must happen 3 times. Not once, not twice, but 3 distinct times. And this couldn't be a private affair, hidden away behind closed doors. It had to be public, in front of everyone, in front of the assembled nobility, the clergy, and the common people who had gathered to watch. The groom, consumed by his own vision of grandeur, readily agreed. In his mind, this trifecta of dominance would make him untouchable. A living legend whispered about in awe and terror. The bride, meanwhile, was little more than a pawn in this elaborate game. She was young, barely a woman, and known throughout Rome for her gentle nature and her deep, abiding faith. She had been raised in a convent, her days filled with prayer and quiet contemplation. Her family, though noble, had seen their political influence wane in recent years. This marriage was their desperate gambit to regain favor, to re-establish their name within the corridors of power. They saw it as a sacrifice. Yes, but a necessary one for the survival of their lineage. They told her it was her sacred duty. They spoke of honor, of family, of God's will. They did not, however, tell her about the ritual. They kept that detail buried, a poisoned secret they hoped would only be revealed when it was too late for her to object. She walked towards the altar believing she was entering a holy union, a partnership blessed by the church. She was innocent of the true nature of the contract that had been signed, the one that treated her not as a partner, but as property to be claimed. As the ceremony began, the air in the Grand Basilica was thick with anticipation. Hundreds of candles flickered, their light dancing across the faces of the assembled guests. The scent of incense and old stone filled the space. The groom stood at the altar, a statue of confidence. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the crowd, taking in the audience for his grand performance. When the bride appeared at the far end of the aisle, a hush fell over the congregation. She was a vision in white, her face pale and delicate beneath her veil. She looked like an angel, a stark contrast to the darkness that awaited her. She walked slowly, her father's arm a trembling support. With every step, a sense of unease began to creep into her heart. The way the groom was looking at her wasn't with love or even affection. It was with a possessive hunger that made her skin crawl. She saw his allies, the cardinal and the bishop, watching from the front pew, their expressions unreadable but unsettling. A cold dread started to bloom in her stomach, a premonition that this was not the holy sacrament she had envisioned. This was something else entirely, something terrifying. The priest's words droned on, the familiar Latin liturgy feeling alien and menacing. When the time came for the vows, the groom's voice boomed through the basilica, each word a declaration of his authority. When it was her turn, her voice was a barely audible whisper. She felt the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, and for the first time, she truly felt trapped. This wasn't a marriage. It was a key. After the exchange of rings, the moment arrived. The priest stepped back, and a silence fell, so profound it was almost deafening. The groom turned to face the congregation, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He then turned back to his new bride. He did not kiss her. Instead, he reached out, and in a gesture that was both shockingly intimate and brutally public, he placed his hand upon her head and forced her to her knees. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was the first act, the beginning of the ritual. He held her there, a symbol of his complete subjugation, his eyes locking with those of her father, a silent, cruel message passing between them. They won. She knelt on the cold marble, her mind reeling in shock and humiliation. The white silk of her dress pooled around her. She could hear the whispers, the shifting of the crowd. Through the haze of her disbelief, she understood. This was the true purpose of the ceremony. It wasn't about unity. It was about her submission. It was about her family's public disgrace. And she knew, with a sickening certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was only the beginning. 2 more times, this humiliation would be enacted. 2 more times, she would be made a symbol of his power. In that moment, her gentle faith shattered, and in its place, something new and hard began to form. It was not love, or duty, or honor. It was a cold, quiet resolve. He thought he was breaking her, but he was forging a weapon. He wanted to make her a subject, but he was creating an adversary. The game had just begun, and she was learning the rules very, very quickly. Thank you for watching. If you're captivated by this story and want to know what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next chapter. Deep within the Vatican, far from the public chapels and the eyes of the faithful, lies a room that tells a story few have ever heard. This wasn't a place of worship as we know it. It was something else entirely. A secret chamber designed for ceremonies that the church no longer practiced in the open light of day. Imagine stepping into this space. The air is thick, heavy, and still. Your eyes adjust to the dim, flickering light cast by countless candles. Their flames dance and create long, distorted shadows that writhe and twist on the walls. Heavy, blood-red curtains hang from ceiling to floor, muffling all sound and absorbing the light, adding to the room's suffocating atmosphere. It feels less like a holy sanctuary and more like a hidden stage. A place where secrets are born and buried. In the very center of this room, a raised platform commands your attention. It's the focal point, the heart of whatever is about to unfold. Surrounding this platform is a circle of ornate, heavy chairs, positioned like silent, judgmental spectators. Every single detail in this room feels deliberate, meticulously planned to create a specific, unsettling effect. Nothing is left to chance. Beside the platform, a small table is draped in a dark cloth. Upon it are objects that seem both ancient and sinister. There's a ceremonial cloth, intricately embroidered with symbols you don't recognize but feel you shouldn't. A heavy gold medallion gleams in the candlelight, its weight almost palpable. Next to it, an old, leather-bound book. Its pages filled with elegant, handwritten Latin script. A silver bowl filled with dark red wine sits beside the book, and next to that, 3 long, unlit candles stand ready. Even before any ritual begins, the meaning of this place is crushingly clear. This is not a chamber for a holy union or a joyous celebration. This is a stage meticulously set for an act of dominance, a display of power masked by the thin veil of ancient tradition. The very architecture and arrangement are designed to intimidate, to assert control, to make anyone who enters feel small and powerless. An entry is a privilege granted to a very select few. Only the most powerful and loyal are permitted to witness the events within these walls. Imagine the procession, cardinals in their scarlet robes, bishops with their stern expressions, and noble observers from powerful families. Their faces unreadable. Swiss guards stand stoically at the entrance, their presence a silent warning. The groom's inner circle, men whose loyalty is absolute, file in and take their seats. There are no common servants here, no outsiders, no one with a dissenting voice or a compassionate heart. Only those who will uphold the order, who will watch and not interfere. Only those who will become complicit through their silence. Years later, those who were there would speak of it only in hushed whispers. They would describe the air as being so heavy it was difficult to breathe, as if the room itself were trying to suffocate them. They'd say it felt like a sound trap, a space designed to swallow every cry, every plea, and ensure that the secrets made within its walls would never escape. It was a prison disguised as a ceremonial chamber. And then, the bride. Witnesses recalled her entrance with a sense of dread. She was pale, almost translucent in the dim, flickering light. Her eyes were wide, but not with joy or anticipation. They were filled with a haunting, knowing fear. It was as if she could see the future, as if she already knew the terrible fate that awaited her on that central platform. She wasn't just a participant in a ceremony. She was the centerpiece of a sacrifice. The witnesses said she looked like a ghost before she had even left the world of the living, and their premonition, their feeling that something awful was about to happen, was chillingly accurate. They were right. The ceremony that followed would shatter the illusion of sanctity and reveal the terrifying truth hidden behind the Vatican's hallowed walls. What happened next would become a dark legend, a story of power, betrayal, and a bride whose fate was sealed to the moment she stepped into that red-curtained room. This wasn't just a forgotten ritual. It was an act of calculated cruelty, and the story of what occurred has been buried for centuries. But secrets this dark have a way of clawing their way back into the light. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as chilling as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. So you do you and T, miss? Our next dive into the hidden histories that shape our world. The ceremony began not with music, not with joyful celebration, but with a profound, almost suffocating silence. A hush fell over the grand hall, the air thick with anticipation and an unspoken dread. Then, the great doors creaked open. The bride appeared, a fragile figure swathed in white, her body trembling almost imperceptibly. She wasn't alone. On either side of her, 2 solemn priests flanked her, their faces grim, their hands clasped firmly on her arms, as if to prevent her from fleeing. They escorted her down the long aisle, her steps hesitant and slow. At the altar, the groom waited, his stood-tall posture exuding an unnerving confidence, a stark contrast to her palpable fear. He watched her approach, not with love or affection, but with cold, calculating eyes. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey, a conqueror surveying his prize. The air crackled with a tension that was almost unbearable. As she reached the altar, the priests released her, and she took her place opposite him. The crowd, a sea of anxious faces, murmured amongst themselves. Their whispers were like the rustling of dry leaves, filled with discomfort and unease, yet no one dared to speak out. The vows they were about to exchange were not the familiar promises of love and devotion heard in churches today. No, these were ancient, harsh words, more like a contract of subjugation than a union of 2 souls. The groom's voice boomed through the silent hall, clear and unwavering. He didn't promise to love or to cherish. He vowed to claim what is rightfully his. The words hung in the air, heavy and menacing. A shiver ran through the assembled guests. What did he mean? What was rightfully his? Her lands? Her title? Or was it something far more personal, far more intimate? The ambiguity was terrifying. Then it was the bride's turn. Her voice, when it came, was a mere whisper, barely audible, laced with a tremor she couldn't conceal. She didn't speak of partnership or mutual respect. Her vow was a chilling surrender. Se promisset to surrender without resistance. The words were a death knell to her freedom, a public declaration of her complete submission. The crowd's murmuring grew louder, a wave of discomfort washing over them. They shifted in their seats, their unease now openly visible. But still, no one moved to intervene. No one dared to challenge the proceedings. It was as if they were all caught in a waking nightmare, frozen by a power they couldn't comprehend. The cardinal presiding over this strange affair then stepped forward. He was an imposing figure, his robes elaborate, his expression unreadable. He raised a mysterious gold medallion high for all to see. It glinted in the candlelight, intricate symbols carved into its surface that seemed to writhe and shift before your very eyes. With slow, deliberate movements, he placed the heavy medallion around the groom's neck. It settled against his chest, a symbol of power, of ownership. Next, the cardinal turned to a small table on the altar. On it stood 3 long, unlit candles. He took a taper and, one by one, lit them. The flames flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the sanctity of the moment. The light was not warm or welcoming. It was eerie, illuminating the grim faces in the hall. With the candles lit, the cardinal's voice echoed once more, cutting through the tense silence. He announced that what was about to happen was not merely a ceremony, but a ritual, one with deep ancient meaning. His eyes swept across the crowd, making contact with each and every person. He commanded that everyone present must bear witness to it in full. It was not an invitation, but a decree. There was no escape. They were all participants now, complicit in their silence. The bride's hands, which had been clenched at her sides, began to shake violently. Her gaze darted desperately towards the main doors, the ones she had just entered. It was a look of pure, unadulterated panic. A silent plea for a savior, for anyone to burst in and put a stop to this horrifying spectacle. But the doors remained shut, the hall remained sealed. No one came. Her last glimmer of hope flickered and died in her eyes, replaced by a look of resigned terror. And then, without another word, without any warning, the ritual began. The groom took a step forward, his cold eyes fixed on her. The cardinal began to chant in a language that was both ancient and guttural, words that seemed to claw at the very air. The 3 flames on the candles suddenly flared, growing taller and brighter, casting an unnatural, pulsating glow across the altar. The symbols on the groom's medallion began to shimmer, emitting a faint, golden light of their own. The murmuring of the crowd ceased, replaced by collective gasps of shock and fear. The bride let out a small, choked sob. What was this ritual? What deep, ancient meaning did it hold? The groom reached out, not to take her hand in a gesture of union, but to grasp her chin, forcing her to look at him. His touch was cold as ice. The ceremony was a sham. This wasn't a marriage. It was something else entirely. It was a sacrifice. The ancient power that had been invoked now filled the room, a palpable force that pressed down on everyone. And in the center of it all, the bride stood, trapped and helpless, as the true, terrifying nature of her fate began to unfold before the horrified eyes of all who were forced to watch. But what happens next? What is this ancient ritual? And why must she surrender to it? Is there any hope for her? Or is her fate already sealed? The secrets of this ceremony are buried deep in history, and we're about to uncover all of them. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because you won't want to miss a single moment of what comes next. The story is just getting started. Have you ever heard of a wedding ritual so strange and unsettling? It sounds like something straight out of a dark fantasy novel. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most mysterious and controversial ceremonies, a ritual known as 3 times in one night. What was it? And why does it still send shivers down our spines centuries later? Historians are still debating the exact meaning behind this phrase, but the most credible documents we have paint a picture that is deeply symbolic and, frankly, brutally humiliating for the bride. This wasn't a celebration of love as we know it. It was a calculated, 3-stage process designed to systematically dismantle a woman's identity and cement the absolute power of the church and her new husband. So, what were these 3 stages? Each one targeted a specific part of the bride's very being, the parts the authorities wanted to break and remold. First, her body. Second, her will. And third, her lineage. It was a complete psychological and social deconstruction, performed publicly for all to see. Let's break down the first stage, which we'll call breaking her autonomy. Imagine the scene. A young bride, standing not at a joyful altar, but on a stark, elevated platform in the center of the town square. The entire community is gathered, not to celebrate, but to bear witness. The air is thick with tension. The groom, instead of a loving partner, acts as her first captor. He takes her by the hand, not gently, but firmly, and forces her onto the platform. This isn't a gesture of unity. It's an act of claiming possession. In front of everyone, her family, her friends, her neighbors, he makes a public declaration. He declares ownership over her. Not partnership, not love, but ownership. His words echo through the silent crowd, each one a hammer blow to her sense of self. Then, a high-ranking church official, often a cardinal, steps forward. He reads from a text, a formal script filled with language designed to strip her of her personal freedom. The words are carefully chosen to transfer all authority over her life, her decisions, and her future from herself to the church and, by extension, to her husband. Can you picture the faces and the crowd? They're watching in silent discomfort. This isn't a joyous occasion. It's a somber, almost grim spectacle. They are there as witnesses, their presence legitimizing the act. They are part of the machine that is breaking this woman. And what about the bride herself? In most accounts, she doesn't resist. She stands there, a passive figure in her own life's drama. Why? Because she knows. She knows that any sign of defiance, any struggle, would only invite worse consequences. Resisting would be futile and would likely lead to harsher, more public punishments. Her compliance is not a sign of agreement, but of survival. This first act is crucial. It's the foundation for everything that follows. By publicly stripping her of her autonomy, the ritual makes it clear that she is no longer her own person. Her body is no longer hers to control. Her choices are no longer hers to make. She has been symbolically and legally reduced to a possession, a vessel for her husband's will and the church's doctrine. This wasn't just a quirky old tradition, it was a powerful tool. Project social control. It sent a clear message to every woman and girl watching. This is your place. This is your fate. Your identity is not your own. The psychological impact of this first stage alone is staggering. To be publicly shamed, to have your very personhood negated in front of everyone you've ever known, is a profound trauma. It's a form of psychological warfare, designed to make the bride docile and obedient before she even enters her new home. It's the ultimate display of patriarchal power, where a woman's value is defined solely by her relationship to a man and an institution. This was just the beginning, the first time and 3 times in one night. The next 2 stages would delve even deeper, targeting her will and her family heritage, ensuring that by the end of the night, the woman she was is completely gone, replaced by the wife they demand her to be. We'll explore those next, but for now, let's reflect on this first step. It's a stark reminder of how societal structures can be used to control and dominate, and how a ceremony, something we associate with joy, can be twisted into an instrument of oppression. What happened in the second stage? Breaking her will. It was even more personal and psychologically invasive. After the public declaration of ownership, the ritual moved to a more private, yet equally intimidating setting. The bride was often taken to a small room, sometimes a chamber within the church itself, accompanied only by the groom, the cardinal, and a few select male elders. The purpose of this stage was to shatter her internal resolve, her spirit. Here she was subjected to a barrage of questions and pronouncements. It wasn't a conversation, it was an interrogation. The cardinal would question her past, her thoughts, her beliefs. Every answer was scrutinized, twisted, and used to reinforce her supposed flaws and weaknesses. She was told that her own will was inherently sinful, that her desires were a source of corruption. The goal was to instill a deep sense of guilt and shame, to make her believe that her own mind was her enemy. The groom's role here was to reinforce this. He might list her perceived faults, things he expected her to change. He would pledge not to love and cherish her, but to guide and correct her, as one would a disobedient child. The elders would nod in agreement, their silent judgment adding to the immense pressure. Any sign of spirit or independent thought was labeled as pride or defiance and was immediately quashed. She was often forced to kneel, to verbally renounce her own will, and to swear an oath of absolute, unquestioning obedience to her husband's every command. This wasn't just about ensuring she'd be an obedient wife. It was about destroying her inner world. It was about convincing her that her own thoughts and feelings were invalid and dangerous. By breaking her will, they ensured she wouldn't just act obediently. She would believe in her own subjugation. She would police her own thoughts, censoring any flicker of defiance before it could even form. It's a terrifyingly effective method of control, turning the prison into one that's internal. And finally, the third stage, breaking her lineage. This was the final, devastating blow. This part differed us from region to region, but its core purpose was always the same: to sever the bride's connection to her own family and her past, to erase her history and replace it with her husband's. In some versions of the ritual, this was highly symbolic. The bride might be forced to stand on a cloth, a rug that represented her family, and the groom would literally cut it away from under her feet, leaving her standing alone on the cold floor, symbolically cut off from her roots. Then, he would place his family's crest or a piece of his family's tartan over her shoulders, physically marking her as his. In other, more brutal versions, it was about her name. She would be forced to publicly renounce her family name. The cardinal would declare her birth name dead, and she would be given a new name, chosen by her husband. Think about that. The name she had carried her entire life. The name that connected her to her parents, her siblings, her ancestors. In that moment, she becomes a non-person, a blank slate onto which her husband's lineage is written. This act also had serious legal and social implications. It often meant she forfeited any right to inheritance from her own family. She was no longer considered part of her birth family's household. Her loyalty, her identity, and her future were now tied exclusively to her husband's clan. It was a way of absorbing her line into his, ensuring that her children would belong solely to his family, with no claim or connection to her own. So, when you put it all together, 3 times in one night. First, her body and autonomy are claimed. Second, her will and spirit are broken. Third, her history and lineage are It's a complete and total annihilation of a woman's identity. By sunrise, the person she was the day before is gone, replaced by a possession, a vessel, and a name-bearer for her husband's family. It's a chilling piece of history, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the long and difficult struggle for women's rights and autonomy. While this specific, brutal ritual may be in the past, the ideas behind it, the control of women's bodies, the suppression of their voices, and the erasure of their identities are battles that are still being fought in various forms around the world today. Understanding women, the darkest histories, is crucial to ensuring we don't repeat them. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into a truly unsettling part of our past. If you found this fascinating, or refining, or both, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you wanna miss our next exploration into the strange and forgotten corners of history. See you next time. The people watching the ritual were absolutely terrified. For many in the room, it was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. They had arrived expecting to see a political marriage, a standard alliance between powerful families. What they got instead was a staged humiliation, a cold and calculated display of power. But fear was a tangible thing in that chamber, a thick blanket smothering every person present. Anyone who dared to object knew they were risking their own life. Anyone who spoke out was gambling with the safety of their entire family. The Vatican's power in that era was absolute, and no one was foolish enough to test its limits. Among the crowd, reactions varied, but all were rooted in horror. Some of the noble women, dressed in their finest silks, instinctively covered their mouths, their eyes wide with disbelief. A few of the older priests, men who had seen their share of political maneuvering, simply closed their eyes, unable to watch the scene unfold. One young guard, barely 19 years old and new to his post, felt the blood drain from his face. He swayed on his feet, struggling to stay conscious, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword for support. Years later, long after the dust had settled, historians managed to track down and secretly interview some of the witnesses from that day. Their accounts, given in hushed tones and with furtive glances over their shoulders, were hauntingly consistent. They all remembered the details of the ceremony, the cold pronouncements, the chilling atmosphere. But when asked what struck them the most, they all said the same thing. The silence was the worst part. Think about that for a moment. In a room filled with the most powerful people of the time, dukes, cardinals, ambassadors, not a single voice was raised in protest. No one offered a word of comfort to the victim at the center of it all. No one challenged the grotesque spectacle. They just watched, as if frozen in time, their faces a mask of controlled terror. They were all complicit in their silence, paralyzed by the overwhelming authority of the church. This collective silence became a crucial part of the trauma. It wasn't just that a terrible thing was happening. It was that it was happening with the silent consent of everyone present. This lack of resistance, this universal passivity, amplified the monstrous nature of the ritual. It made the event feel even more surreal, more nightmarish. The silence confirmed that there was no hope, no one to appeal to, no justice to be found. It was a clear message to everyone. You are alone, and you are powerless. So, what exactly was this ritual? And who was at the heart of this public degradation? We're talking about an event that has been whispered about for centuries. A dark chapter in the history of the papacy that many would prefer to forget. To understand it, we need to go back to the heart of Renaissance Rome, a city of incredible art and cutthroat politics, where the line between the sacred and the profane was dangerously blurred. At the center of our story is a family that, for a time, was more powerful than any royal dynasty in Europe. The name itself conjures images of ambition, corruption, and ruthless cunning. And at the head of this family was Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia. He was a man who understood power better than anyone, and he was not afraid to use his position as the vicar of Christ to further his family's worldly ambitions. The Pope had several children, but his favorite was his daughter, Lucrezia Borgia. Lucrezia has gone down in history as a femme fatale, a poisoner and a plotter. But the truth is far more complex and, in many ways, far more tragic. From a very young age, Lucretia was a pawn in her father's political games. Her marriages were not about love or companionship. They were strategic alliances, designed to secure territories and forge allegiances for the Borgia family. Her first marriage, at the tender age of 13, was to a man named Giovanni Sforza, the Lord of Pizzo. This union was meant to solidify the Borgia's power base in northern Italy. For a while, the alliance was useful, but in the shifting sands of Italian politics, alliances were made and broken with breathtaking speed. Soon, the Sforza family fell out of favor with Pope Alexander VI. They were no longer useful to him. In fact, they were becoming a liability. And that meant Giovanni Sforza had to go. But simply assassinating a high-profile nobleman, the husband of the Pope's own daughter, was a risky move. It could spark a war and tarnish the papacy's reputation. Alexander needed a cleaner solution, one that would legally and publicly sever the ties between the two families without bloodshed. He needed an annulment. However, getting an annulment in the 5th-10th century wasn't easy, even for a pope. There had to be legitimate grounds. The most common reason was non-consummation of the marriage. So, the Borgias concocted a story. They declared that Giovanni Sforza was impotent and had therefore been unable to fulfill his marital duties. This was a deeply humiliating accusation for any man in that era, let alone a proud nobleman from a powerful family. Giovanni was outraged, evoked Baek, claiming that he had consummated the marriage and that the Pope was lying to get rid of him for political reasons. He even publicly accused the Pope and his son Cesare Borgia of having their own incestuous interests in Lucretia, a scandalous claim designed to hurt them as much as they had hurt him. The conflict escalated into a public and messy legal battle. Giovanni refused to accept the annulment quietly. He knew that agreeing to the charge of impotence would make him a laughingstock across Europe and ruin his reputation forever. The Pope, in turn, put immense pressure on Giovanni's family. He threatened them with excommunication and the seizure of their lands. Essentially, he held a knife to their throats and told them to make Giovanni comply. Finally, under immense duress from his own family, Giovanni Sforza broke. He agreed to sign a sworn statement admitting to his supposed impotence and accepting the annulment. But Pope Alexander VI wasn't satisfied with a private signature on a piece of paper. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to make an example of Giovanni Sforza, to show the world what happens to those who are no longer useful to the Borgia. And that brings us back to the horrifying ritual in that silent room. It was the final, formal act of the annulment process. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a carefully orchestrated ceremony of public shaming. Giovanni Sforza was summoned to the Vatican, forced to stand before an assembly of Rome's most influential figures. Imagine the scene. Giovanni, a proud warrior and lord, forced to stand alone in the center of the room. He was made to publicly confess, in his own words, that he was impotent and had never consummated his marriage to Lucretia. He had to read a statement that had been written for him, stripping away every last shred of his dignity. The words he was forced to speak were not just a legal declaration. They were a social death sentence. And Lucretia was there, too. She was forced to watch as her husband was systematically destroyed. At only 17 years old, she was a key player in this drama, but she had no real power. She was as much a victim of her father's ambition as Giovanni was. Some accounts say she sat quietly, her face pale, while others suggest she played her part with a detached composure that unnerved the onlookers. Either way, she was a prisoner in a golden cage. The silence of the witnesses was, in a way, the most crucial element of the ritual. It was a form of psychological reinforcement. The lack of any dissent, any murmur of sympathy, sent a clear and chilling message to Giovanni and to everyone else watching. The Pope's power is absolute. The Borgias are untouchable. Defy them, and you will be utterly and completely alone. You will be stripped of your honor, your name, and your dignity, and no one will lift a finger to help you. This event had lasting consequences. Giovanni Sforza returned to his lands a broken man, his reputation in tatters. He was forever known as the man who was publicly declared impotent by the Pope. He would later remarry and have children, proving the Borgia's claim was a lie, but the damage was done. The stain on his honor never fully washed away. For Lucretia, This was just one of several traumatic events that would define her young life. She was quickly married off again, this time to Alfonso of Aragon, in another political match. This marriage would also end in tragedy, with Alfonso being murdered, likely on the orders of her own brother. Lucretia's life shows how women, even those at the highest levels of society, were often treated as disposable assets, their personal feelings and well-being secondary to the political ambitions of men. The ritualized humiliation of Giovanni Sforza is a stark reminder of the brutal nature of power in the Renaissance. It wasn't just about armies and treaties. It was also about psychological warfare, public shaming, and the manipulation of religious authority for personal gain. Pope Alexander VI mastered this dark art. He understood that fear could be a more effective weapon than any sword. The silence of the room that day echoes through history. It tells a story not just about the Borgias, but about human nature itself. It raises uncomfortable questions about our own complicity when we witness injustice. How often do people stay silent out of fear? How often does the collective silence of a group allow terrible things to happen? The terror in that Vatican chamber wasn't just about what was being done to one man. It was about the chilling realization that, under the right circumstances, anyone could be next, and no one would say a word. Thank you so much for watching. The story of the Borgias is filled with incredible drama and intrigue. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Was the Pope justified, or was this a pure abuse of power? See you in the next video. When the last guest finally departed, the grand chamber fell silent, and in that echoing emptiness, the bride collapsed. The weight of the ceremony, the forced smiles, the binding words she never wanted to say, all came crashing down on her. She cried until her throat was raw, until her voice was just a rasping whisper. She pleaded with the attendants, the stoic figures who had dressed her in finery just hours before, to take her home. But her home was gone, replaced by this gilded cage. Their faces were impassive, their orders absolute. They refused. She told them she couldn't bear it, that she couldn't stay under the same roof as the man who now called himself her husband. The thought of being near him sent a wave of cold dread through her. But no one was allowed to help her. She was a prisoner of her new status, surrounded by walls of tradition and power. In the deepest, darkest hour of that long night, when the moon cast long shadows across the marble floors, she whispered a promise to herself. She would find a way out. She was intelligent enough to know that a physical escape was impossible. The Vatican was a fortress, its corridors patrolled by guards whose loyalty was not to her, but to the institution and to the powerful man she had been bound to. Every door was locked. Every window was a sheer drop. Running was not an option. But as she sat there, her tears drying on her cheeks, a different kind of plan began to form. If she couldn't escape with her body, she would escape with her will. Her escape would be political. From that moment, she stopped seeing herself as a victim and started seeing herself as a strategist. Her mind, once clouded by despair, became sharp and focused. She began to plan, quietly, meticulously. She replayed the entire dreadful ceremony in her head, not with the horror of a bride, but with the cold calculation of a general surveying a battlefield. She dissected every moment, every glance, every whispered comment. She started by noting the witnesses. Who among the powerful cardinals and nobles had looked away during the vows? Who had flinched when her hand was placed in his? She recalled the faces of those who looked disgusted, their features tight with a disapproval they couldn't entirely mask. These were not her friends. Not yet. But their revulsion was a crack in the solid wall of her husband's power. A crack she could widen. Then, she focused on the clergy. She memorized the faces of the younger priests who had looked uncomfortable, their eyes shifting nervously as the ceremony unfolded. They were men of God, sworn to uphold sanctity, and some of them had clearly seen this union for what it was: a sacrilege, a political maneuver disguised as a holy sacrament. Veronese was a resource. Their conscience could be an ally. A profound realization dawned on her. She wasn't the only one who was afraid. As she scanned the faces in her memory, she saw it. The flicker of fear in the eyes of certain courtiers, the subtle difference that bordered on terror when they addressed her new husband. She realized that some of the very people who held her captive feared the groom as much as she did. His cruelty, his ambition, his ruthlessness, these were not secrets. They were well-known weapons, and they created enemies in the shadows. These people, these fearful but influential individuals, could be her allies. They shared a common enemy. Her strength that night was not physical. It wasn't about breaking down doors or scaling walls. It was a deep, unyielding mental fortitude. It was the refusal to be broken. After everything that had happened, after the public humiliation and the private terror, she refused to let this ritual define her. She would not be just the bride. She would not be just his wife. She was a mind, a will, a force of her own. And deep inside her, in the quiet of that desolate chamber, a rebellion began to grow. It wasn't a loud, fiery uprising, but a silent, patient revolution of the mind. She would learn the rules of their game, the intricate dance of Vatican politics, the currency of secrets and favors. She would use their own system against them. She would gather her allies, not with promises of power, but with the shared hope of survival and justice. Her husband believed he had acquired a beautiful, docile pawn to be used in his games of power. He had no idea that in forcing her into this union, he had not gained a pawn, but had instead placed a queen on the board, right in the heart of his kingdom. A queen who was now awake, watching, and planning her first move. Her confinement was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her fight. The world would soon learn her name, not as the wife of a powerful man, but as the architect of his downfall. Her escape had begun. Thank you for watching. If you are captivated by this story of resilience and strategy, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more tales of history's hidden figures coming your way. See you in the next video. The sunrise brought no warmth, no peace. Only a chilling silence that settled over the hallowed halls of the Vatican. Something had happened, something so profound and unsettling that the Church, an institution built on millennia of tradition and power, moved with a speed it rarely displayed. The gears of a massive cover-up began to turn almost immediately. The first order of business was to rewrite history itself. Official documents, records that were meant to be sacrosanct, were meticulously altered. Scribes worked through the night, their quills scratching out the truth, replacing it with a carefully constructed lie. The ink of the old story was barely dry before the new one was being written over it, a palimpsest of deception. But rewriting paper is one thing, silencing people is another. The servants who had been present, the ones who saw everything with their own eyes, were the first to be dealt with. They were gathered, their faces pale with fear, and sworn to a silence deeper than any confession. Their livelihoods, their very lives, depended on their ability to forget. The guards, the stoic protectors of the Vatican's secrets, were not asked, but threatened. Their loyalty was tested not with appeals to faith, but with cold, hard intimidation. They understood the price of a loose tongue. And then there were the guests, the noble witnesses who had traveled from far and wide for what they thought would be a joyous occasion. They were taken aside, one by one, and warned. The message was clear and unambiguous. Forget what you saw. Forget the ritual. Forget the darkness that clung to the air. The official version of events was the only version that mattered now. And what was that official version? It was a masterpiece of propaganda, a fairy tale spun from threads of piety and splendor. The chronicles would read, "A blessed union between two of Christendom's most noble families, an occasion filled with profound joy and holy tradition." It painted a picture of celebration, of divine approval, of a match made in heaven and sanctified on earth. It was beautiful. It was inspiring, and it was a complete fabrication. Every detail that didn't fit this pristine narrative was systematically erased from the public record. They erased the memory of the strange, dark ritual that had taken place. They erased the 3 ominous candles that burned with an unnatural light. They erased the elevated platform at the center of the room, the stage for an unspeakable act. And most importantly, they erased the bride's humiliation, her silent suffering that was etched onto the faces of all who were forced to watch. In this new, sanitized history, there was no room for darkness. There was no room for truth. To even mention what had truly transpired was to court disaster. Anyone who dared to speak of it, to whisper the real story in the marketplaces or taverns, risked everything. Exile was the kindest punishment. For many, the price of truth was a swift and silent death. The Vatican's power was absolute, its reach long. For centuries, it seemed their secret was safe, buried under layers of revised histories and the silent graves of those who knew too much. The official fairy tale became the accepted truth, passed down from generation to generation. The story of the Blessed Union was told and retold, a shining example of faith and nobility. The darkness was forgotten, or so they thought. An institution as old and vast as the Church cannot control everything. Secrets have a way of seeping through the cracks, like water through stone. In the rush to silence and destroy, a few crucial pieces of evidence slipped through their grasp. A handful of secret letters, penned by witnesses in the dead of night, survived the purge. These weren't official documents. They were personal, desperate accounts written by people who knew they were risking their lives. They couldn't bear the burden of what they had seen alone. They had to tell someone, even if it was just a piece of paper they hoped would one day find the right hands. The Church launched a frantic effort to hunt down and burn every one of these letters, treating them as heretical texts. But they failed. A few escaped the flames, hidden away in secret compartments, passed down through trusted family lines, or lost in dusty archives, only to be rediscovered centuries later. These surviving letters are the reason we know this story today. They are our window into the truth, a collection of fragmented but powerful testimonies that contradict the official narrative in every way. They are raw, emotional, and utterly convincing. Some of the letters focused on the bride, describing her tears that fell not from joy, but from a place of deep despair. One witness wrote, "Her eyes were vacant, like a doll's, and the tears traced paths through the powder on her cheeks. Yet she made no sound." They speak of a sorrow so profound it silenced the entire chamber. Others wrote about the groom. There was no mention of love or tenderness in their descriptions. Instead, they described his prideful expression, a look of triumph and possession that chilled them to the bone. He did not look at her as a man looks at his beloved, one account reads, but as a conqueror looks upon his prize. But perhaps the most haunting descriptions are not of the bride or the groom, but of the writer's own feelings. Several letters mention the sick, churning feeling in their stomachs as they were forced to watch the proceedings. They were complicit in their silence, trapped by their positions and their fear. One nobleman wrote to his brother, "I have never felt such shame. We stood as honored guests and watched a soul be crushed, and we did nothing. We smiled and we applauded as we were told. May God forgive us all." These letters, these fragile pieces of paper, are more than just historical artifacts. They are whispers from the past, cries for justice that refuse to be silenced. They dismantle the carefully constructed fairy tale and expose the rotten core beneath. They tell a story not of a blessed union, but of a brutal transaction. A story of power, coercion, and a secret the Vatican was willing to kill, to protect. And it makes you wonder, if they went to such lengths to cover up this one event, what other truths still lie buried, waiting for a stray letter or a forgotten diary to bring them into the light? The story doesn't end with the survival of these letters. Their rediscovery was just the beginning of another battle, a battle for history itself. For centuries, the official narrative was so entrenched that challenging it seemed impossible. The first historians who presented these letters as evidence were dismissed as heretics or sincere. The Church, even in a more modern era, used its considerable influence to discredit their findings. They argued the letters were forgeries, the products of anti-clerical enemies trying to smear the institution's name. They pointed to the centuries of accepted history, the beautiful story of the Blessed Union, and asked, why should a few scandalous letters overturn what has been known for so long? It was a powerful argument. People often prefer a comfortable lie to an uncomfortable truth. The fairy tale was reassuring. The story told in the letters was horrifying, but the evidence was persistent. Modern forensic techniques, like ink and paper analysis, helped to verify the age of the letters, proving they were not modern forgeries. Cross-referencing the names and dates mentioned in the letters with other, more mundane, contemporary records added layers of credibility. A mention of a specific cardinal being in Rome at that time, or a reference to a particular style of dress, could be verified through other sources, lending weight to the entire account. Slowly, painstakingly, a new picture of that fateful day began to emerge. The work was slow and often dangerous. Researchers faced immense pressure, their careers threatened, their funding cut. But the truth has a momentum of its own. More and more scholars began to take the letters seriously, and the official story started to crumble under the weight of the evidence. What these letters revealed was a side of power that we often forget. They showed that history is not a static collection of facts, but a narrative, and the person holding the pen holds immense power. The Vatican didn't just hide a scandal, they created an alternate reality. They understood that if a lie is repeated often enough, with enough authority, it becomes the truth. And for a very long time, it worked. The story of the 3 candles, the platform, the bride's silent tears. It was all lost, confined to the memories of a few terrified people and the ink of their secret letters. The survival of these letters is it's a testament to the human need to record the truth, even at great personal risk. It's a reminder that no matter how powerful an institution is, it cannot erase everything. Somewhere, a record, a memory, a whisper of what really happened endures. Today, this story serves as a powerful lesson about questioning official narratives and seeking out the hidden voices in history. It forces us to ask what other stories have been silenced, what other truths have been buried by those in power. Every grand monument, every official history, every fairy tale ending has a shadow, and it is in those shadows that we often find the most profound in human stories. The tale of this wedding is no longer just a secret whispered in the dark. It is a stark reminder that history is a battlefield, and the fight for truth is one that never truly ends. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more hidden histories. We'll see you next time. Have you ever heard of a wedding that, instead of uniting families, tore an entire system apart? This isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's a dark chapter from history, a story of a ritual meant to display power, but which ultimately sowed the seeds of rebellion. Let's travel back to a time when the Vatican's influence stretched across Europe, not just in matters of faith, but in the intricate dance of politics and power. In this era, noble families were the chess pieces, and marriages were the strategic moves on the board. The Vatican, a master player, orchestrated a union between 2 powerful houses, intending to forge an unbreakable alliance and solidify its grip on the region. The centerpiece of this grand design was a lavish wedding, complete with a unique, ancient ritual. This wasn't just about exchanging vows. It was a public spectacle designed to demonstrate dominance, to show everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest lord, who was truly in charge. The groom, handpicked by the church, was from a family known for its unwavering loyalty. The bride, from a house whose allegiance was deemed less certain, was the key to securing a new frontier of influence. The Vatican believed this ceremony would bind her, her family, and their lands to its cause forever. The stage was set, the guests had arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Everyone expected a display of grandeur and piety. What they witnessed, however, was something entirely different. It was a moment that would be whispered about 4 generations, a moment that would change the course of history. The ritual itself was shrouded in ancient tradition, its origins lost to time but its purpose clear: to symbolize the submission of the bride's family to the groom, yes, and by extension, to the Vatican. It began as expected, with pomp and circumstance. The great hall was filled with the most influential figures of the time: dukes, cardinals, and ambassadors, all watching intently. The groom, puffed up with the importance of the occasion, stood with an air of immense pride. The bride, a pawn in this high-stakes game, was led forward. But as the ceremony unfolded, its true nature was revealed. It wasn't a celebration of union. It was an exercise in humiliation. The ritual demanded a series of symbolic acts from the bride that were designed to publicly strip her of her family's heritage and independence. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, meant to break her spirit and serve as a warning to any other family that might consider defying the church's will. The audience watched, their initial AO turning to a stunned, uncomfortable silence. The groom, far from showing any grace or compassion to his new wife, reveled in her discomfort. His arrogance was on full display. A smirk played on his lips as he watched her perform the demeaning acts. For him, this wasn't just a political necessity. It was a personal victory, a confirmation of his own superiority. It was in that moment, under the cold gaze of hundreds of powerful people, that the Vatican's plan began to unravel. They wanted to project strength, but what the audience saw was cruelty. They wanted to inspire loyalty, but instead, they planted the seeds of deep-seated resentment. The immediate aftermath was not what the Vatican strategists had anticipated. On the surface, the alliance was sealed. The papers were signed, the titles were exchanged, and the political map was redrawn to their advantage. But beneath this veneer of success, a storm was brewing. The ritual had a profound and lasting effect on the two central figures, but not in the way anyone had planned. The bride was changed forever by that night. The public humiliation didn't break her. It forged her into something far more dangerous to the Vatican's ambitions. An enemy. She never forgave them. Not the church that orchestrated her shame, and certainly not the arrogant groom who had so clearly enjoyed it. She performed her duties as a wife, but in secret, her mind was alight with plans for retribution. She was intelligent, charismatic, and now, fiercely motivated. She began to subtly cultivate relationships, not with the Vatican's allies, but with other noble families who had their own reasons to resent the church's overreach. These were quiet conversations in shaded gardens, coded messages passed through trusted servants, and alliances built not on formal treaties, but on shared distrust. She used her position, her access, and her considerable charm to build a shadow network of opposition right under the Vatican's nose. Her actions were patient and deliberate. She wasn't seeking a swift, bloody revenge. She was playing a long game, slowly and meticulously undermining the very foundation of power that her marriage was supposed to reinforce. And what of the groom? The ritual that had so hardened his bride had the opposite effect on him. It fed his ego, inflating his already considerable arrogance to monumental proportions. He saw the success of the wedding not as a complex political maneuver, but as a personal triumph, a testament to his own greatness and the divine favor he believed he enjoyed. He became increasingly dismissive of others, convinced of his own he believed the alliance and his new wife's submission had made him untouchable. But arrogance, as history so often teaches us, is a dangerous flaw in a leader. It blinds you to the threats gathering in the shadows. While he was preening and posturing, his enemies were multiplying. The other nobles who had witnessed the ritual hadn't forgotten the cruelty they saw. They looked at his smug satisfaction and saw not a strong leader, but a petty tyrant. His own allies began to find his condescending attitude tiresome and his judgment questionable. He made political blunders, alienated key supporters, and dismissed wise counsel, all because he believed he knew best. The quiet opposition network that his wife was building found fertile ground among those he had offended. Within just a few years, the solid base of support his family had enjoyed 4 generations began to crumble. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, steady erosion. Favors were denied, alliances frayed, and his influence waned. Many historians now point to that wedding night as the beginning of his downfall. It was the night the world saw the man behind the title, and they did not like what they saw. His arrogance had made him a target, and the woman he had humiliated was quietly helping his enemies take aim. The ripple effects of this single event spread far beyond the couple themselves. The wedding, intended to be a masterstroke of Vatican diplomacy, became a historic miscalculation. For generations, the Church had relied on the support of noble families to maintain its temporal power. These alliances were the bedrock of its political influence. But the spectacle of cruelty at that wedding sent a chilling message to nobles across the land. They saw how the Vatican was willing to use and humiliate one of their own for political gain. It sparked a wave of quiet disillusionment. Families who had once been steadfast supporters began to question their loyalty. They started to see the Church not as a spiritual guide, but as a manipulative political entity that saw them as mere pawns. The bride's secret network grew stronger as more families, spooked by what they'd seen, sought to create a counterbalance to the Vatican's power. This shift was subtle at first, but it marked the beginning of a significant decline in noble support for the Church's political ambitions. The Vatican had wanted to demonstrate its dominance, to show that it could bend even the proudest families to its will. Instead, it exposed the iron fist inside the velvet glove. They showed their capacity for cruelty, and in doing so, they revealed the vulnerability. They had misjudged the nature of power. They believed it could be seized and displayed through force and humiliation. But true, lasting power is built on respect, loyalty, and mutual interest. By choosing to display dominance through cruelty, they had traded long-term stability for a fleeting moment of control. And cruelty, as the years that followed would prove, always comes with a price. The wedding was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a long and costly reckoning for the Vatican and the noble houses of Europe. It was a lesson written in the silent defiance of a wronged bride and the slow, inglorious fall of an arrogant groom. Thank you for watching. This story is a powerful reminder that history is often shaped not by grand battles, but by the personal dramas and hidden resentments that play out behind the scenes. If you found this journey into the past fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden side of history. Let us know in the comments what you think about the power of such symbolic acts. See you in the next video. Have you ever heard a story so shocking, so dark, that the most powerful institution on earth tried to erase it from history? Tonight, we journey into the heart of the Vatican, but not the one you see on postcards. We're going behind the gilded doors, past the Swiss Guard, and into the shadowy corridors where secrets are buried deeper than the catacombs. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. A story whispered in hushed tones for centuries, passed down in forbidden texts, atalaknaun, as 3 times in one night. What could be so terrible that the Holy See itself would want it forgotten forever? It's a question that pulls us into a labyrinth of power, piety, and profound hypocrisy. This isn't just a historical anecdote. It's a chilling reminder that even the most sacred places can hide the most profane acts. The event we are about to uncover allegedly took place within the very walls built to glorify God. A night where sacred vows were not just broken, but shattered in the most unimaginable way. The Vatican, a symbol of moral authority for over 1 billion people, has a history filled with moments of glory and moments of shame. But this story, this one is different. It challenges the very foundation of its perceived holiness. The whispers began centuries ago, recorded in secret diaries and coded letters by those who witnessed the events or heard the immediate, horrified accounts. These weren't just rumors spread by enemies of the church. They were testimonies from within, from cardinals, bishops, and even papal staff who were sworn to secrecy, but whose consciences couldn't bear the silence. They wrote of a night of debauchery so extreme, so sacrilegious, that it stained the apostolic palace itself. The name 3 times in one night isn't just a dramatic title. It's a literal, horrifying description of the events that transpired. Imagine the scene. Rome, a city of saints and sinners, under the cloak of darkness. While the faithful slept, believing their spiritual leaders were in prayer, something else was happening in the papal apartments. The accounts describe a lavish banquet, but this was no ordinary feast. It was a descent into a kind of hedonism that would make the Roman emperors blush. Powerful figures of the church, men who preached chastity and humility to the masses, were allegedly indulging in excesses that defied every principle they claimed to uphold. The details, which we will explore, are graphic and disturbing. They paint a picture of a court that had lost its moral compass entirely. Why did the Vatican try so hard to delete this event? Because it wasn't just a case of a few bad apples. The story implicated the highest echelons of power, suggesting a systemic corruption that reached the very top. If a story like this got out, it could shatter the illusion of papal infallibility and divine guidance. It would prove that the men who claimed to be God's representatives on earth were, in some cases, just men, susceptible to the darkest of human impulses. So, they did what powerful institutions have always done when faced with a scandal that threatens their existence. They tried to bury it. Historical records were altered. Documents were burned. Witnesses were silenced, either through threats, exile, or worse. An official narrative was created, one that painted a picture of piety and order. Anyone who dared to speak the truth was branded a heretic, a liar, or an enemy of the faith. The Vatican's archives, famously vast and secretive, became a fortress to protect its reputation, not just a library of its history. The suppression campaign was so thorough, so ruthless, that for centuries, the story of 3 times in one night faded into the realm of myth and anti-Catholic propaganda. It became easy to dismiss. But truth has a stubborn way of surviving. Like a seed buried under concrete, it finds a crack and pushes its way toward the light. Secret societies, disillusioned scholars, and breakaway sects kept the memory alive. They preserved the forbidden texts, copied the incriminating letters, and passed the story from one generation to the next. They understood that this night mattered. It wasn't just about exposing a scandal. It was about understanding the dangerous nature of unchecked power. It was a lesson in how absolute power, especially when cloaked in religious authority, can corrupt absolutely. So, what exactly happened during 3 times in one night? According to the surviving accounts, the night involved a trio of depraved acts, each more shocking than the last, orchestrated for the amusement of a powerful few. The first act was a mockery of faith itself, a blasphemous parody of a holy sacrament, turning a sacred ritual into a theatrical display of sin. The second act was a descent into pure cruelty, where human beings were treated as objects for sport, their dignity stripped away within the hallowed halls. The third and final act was the ultimate betrayal, an act so vile it was said to have made the angels weep. These aren't just sensational details. They are crucial to understanding the warning this story holds. It reveals how institutions, whether religious or secular, can become so insulated, so convinced of their own righteousness, that they believe they are above the very laws moral and divine that they impose on others. The gilded ceilings and priceless art of the Vatican became a backdrop for acts that contradicted everything the art was meant to inspire. The holiness of the space was used as a shield, a cover for darkness. It reminds us that we must always be willing to look behind the facade, to question authority, and to hold the powerful accountable, no matter how high their throne. Why should we care about a centuries-old story? Because the patterns repeat. The story of 3 times in one night is not just a ghost from the Vatican's past. It is a mirror reflecting the dangers that still exist today. We see echoes of it in every institution that prioritizes its reputation over the well-being of the vulnerable. We see it in every leader who uses their position for personal gain. We see it every time silence is chosen over justice in the face of wrongdoing. The mechanisms of power and control, the tactics of suppression and denial, they haven't changed. This night matters because it teaches us about the courage of whistleblowers, the few who risked everything to tell the truth. Their secret writings are a testament to the power of the written word to outlast empires and expose lies. It shows us that history is not just written by the winners. It's also preserved by the defiant. Their legacy is a call to action for our own time, to listen to the whispers, to seek out the hidden stories, and to never let fear control the narrative. When we see injustice, when we see cruelty masked as tradition or authority, we have a choice. We can be silent, or we can be the ones who remember. The story of 3 times in one night is more than a legend. It's a vital piece of our collective history, a warning that echoes through the ages. It cautions us against placing blind faith in any single person or institution. It warns us about the seductive nature of power and the darkness that can fester in the absence of transparency and accountability. It's a grim reminder that behind the grandest buildings and the most shining altars, there can be shadows deeper and more terrifying than we can possibly imagine. History remembers, even when the powerful try to make it forget. And by exploring these forbidden chapters, we do more than just uncover the past. We arm ourselves with the knowledge and the vigilance to ensure that such shadows never have the chance to grow so dark again. The truth, no matter how long it's been buried, will always find its way out. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's most fiercely guarded secrets. If you found this exploration fascinating, please like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And let us know in the comments, what other historical secrets do you think need to be brought into the light? Until next time, keep questioning.